Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We always say ask and you shall receive, right?
Right.
Well, tons of you have been asking for a deep dive into the future of education.
Yeah, it's a pretty hot topic these days.
It really is. So we dug into a fascinating report from Google for Education, and let me tell you, this isn't just some pie-in-the-sky speculation.
Not at all.
They partnered with experts from 24 countries, crunched a ton of data, and identified 3 huge trends that are going to completely reshape the education landscape. And get this, they're not just thinking about next year or even the next decade.
Oh, no, they're thinking way, way ahead.
Exactly. We're talking about kids starting school today who could be retiring in the 2080s. That's the future we're grappling with here.
It's mind-boggling when you really think about it.
It really is. So, are you ready to have your mind blown? Trend number 1 is the rise of the global problem solver. But before you think this is just about geography, it goes way deeper than that.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
This isn't about memorizing capitals or knowing where every country is on a map.
Right. It's about understanding how interconnected we all are, recognizing different perspectives, and realizing that our actions have ripple effects way beyond our immediate surroundings.
Exactly. It's about empathy, understanding, and seeing yourself as part of a global community. The report actually uses the phrase global citizenship, which I think really captures the essence of this trend.
It's like, remember back in school when your teacher would say, think globally, act locally. This takes that idea to a whole new level.
Totally. And it's not just about what you know, but also about who you are as a person.
Oh, that's so important.
The report even emphasizes the importance of understanding your whole self and how that plays into being a global citizen. They actually quote Jenny Majera, who's the global head of education impact at Google. She used to be a teacher herself.
Oh, wow. So she's got that real world experience.
Exactly. And she talks about this idea of nurturing the whole child learner concept, which is fascinating. She really emphasizes going beyond just geographic definitions of global.
That makes sense. So how does this actually play out in the classroom?
Well, Majira talks about how she actually brought this global mindset into her own classroom in Chicago.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Imagine being in her class, and instead of just memorizing facts, you're discussing real-world problems, brainstorming solutions, and considering different perspectives. It's about connecting her teaching to the real world and helping students see themselves as agents of change.
That's awesome. So it's about making those connections and realizing that even small actions can have a global impact. I love that. But here's the thing. Being a global problem solver also requires a whole new set of skills. And that, my friends, brings us to trend number 2, evolving skill sets. And let me throw out a statistic here just to get your wheels turning. By 2025, nearly 85 million jobs are predicted to disappear.
Yeah, that's a scary number. But before you start panicking, there's more to the story.
There is. The report also predicts that 97 million new jobs will emerge. So, yes, the job market is undergoing a massive transformation, but it's not all doom and gloom. The key here is adaptability.
Adaptability is key. It's less about robots taking over, although automation is definitely a factor, and more about the very nature of work changing.
Right. Think about it. The job you have your eye on now might require a whole different skill set in just a few years. So how do we prepare for that?
Well, the World Economic Forum did a study and highlighted some skills that are going to be in super high demand. Analytical thinking, innovation, complex problem solving, creativity. These are things that, at least for now, machines aren't so great at.
It's interesting because those are all skills that require a lot more than just memorizing facts.
Exactly. It's not just about what you know, but how you think and how you apply that knowledge.
Okay, so we know the world is changing, and the skills we need are changing too. But how do we actually equip future generations with these skills? That's where things get really interesting. And I'll give you a hint. Rote memorization is OUT.
Out.
Real world application and project-based learning are IM.
Absolutely. We're talking about moving away from just cramming information and towards teaching people how to think critically, solve problems, and adapt to new situations.
And I think this is where we see a real shift from the traditional model of education to something that's much more dynamic and engaging.
Totally.
And it's not just about making learning more fun, although I'm all for that. It's about making it more relevant and preparing students for the real world.
100%.
And you know what? Majira is a perfect example of this. She used to incorporate real-world scenarios into her math lessons. Instead of just drilling multiplication tables, she'd present her students with real-world problems that required them to use multiplication.
So much more engaging. I bet the kids loved it.
I know, right? No more endless multiplication problems in a workbook.
It's about taking those skills out of the textbook and showing how they apply in the real world. And that's where approaches like project-based learning and phenomenon-based learning come into play. These methods encourage students to engage with their learning in a more active, hands-on way.
It's about making those connections, right? Seeing how math or science or history actually applies to their lives.
Exactly. And this kind of active learning helps students develop those critical thinking and problem-solving skills that are going to be so essential in the future.
So we're talking about a classroom that looks radically different from what we're used to. And speaking of radically different, let's dive into the third major trend, lifelong learning. And I'm not talking about taking a pottery class for fun, although I'm all for that too.
Right. This is about so much more than just picking up a new hobby.
I'm talking about fundamentally rethinking education over our entire lifespan.
It's a huge shift. And it's not some futuristic fantasy. The report predicts as many as half the children born today in some countries could live to be 100, a 100-year lifespan.
Wow, that's incredible.
Right. So we need to be prepared to adapt and learn throughout our lives.
Think about that, a 100-year lifespan. The concept of school takes on a whole new meaning.
Exactly. It's no longer just something you do for the first 18, 22 years of your life. We're talking multiple careers, constantly evolving industries, and a constant need to adapt and upskill.
We're talking about a world where learning never stops.
Right. And that's a really exciting, but also somewhat daunting prospect.
I can see that. So where do we even begin to wrap our heads around this idea of lifelong learning?
Well, the report highlights the importance of fostering a growth mindset, both in ourselves and in future generations.
That makes sense. So how do we actually do that? How do we cultivate that love of learning that lasts a lifetime?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we're going to unpack in more detail in our next episode. But one thing's for sure, it's going to require a fundamental shift in how we think about education, both individually and as a society.
So we've been talking about these massive shifts in education, global problem solving, evolving skill sets, lifelong learning. But how do we actually make these ideas concrete? It's one thing to talk about it, but another to actually live it, really.
Oh, totally. It's like anything else, easier said than done, right?
Exactly. So where do we even begin? The report mentioned some pretty interesting strategies.
Yeah, one thing that stood out to me was the importance of role models. Remember how Jenny Majira talked about inviting guest speakers into her classroom? People who embodied that spirit of adaptability and continuous learning?
Oh, right. People who had maybe made a few career switches along the way, right?
Exactly. And it's so powerful for kids to see those real-life examples firsthand. Like, it's one thing to hear your teacher say, you can be anything you want to be. But it's another thing entirely to meet someone who's actually lived that.
It makes it real.
Right. And Majir actually mentions her sister, Kat Cho, as an example.
Yeah.
Kat's now a New York Times bestselling author, but guess what? She started her career as a cancer researcher.
Wow. Talk about a career 180. That's incredible.
Right. And I think it just goes to show you that it's okay to change directions, to explore different passions, and to keep growing throughout your life.
Like you were saying earlier, your dream job might not even exist yet. So how can you limit yourself to just one path?
Exactly. And it's not just about inspiring kids either. It's about cultivating that growth mindset within ourselves too.
Oh, absolutely. We all need a little dose of that, right?
Totally. We live in a world that often values specialization. But I think the future belongs to those who are adaptable, curious, and willing to step outside their comfort zones.
It's about embracing that beginner's mind, right? Being open to new experiences, new skills, even if it means feeling a little uncomfortable at times.
Exactly. And it's not just about acquiring new skills for a job either. I think lifelong learning is also about personal enrichment, expanding your horizons, becoming a more well-rounded individual.
Totally. It's about nurturing that curiosity for the world around you.
100%.
You know, it reminds me of something I heard recently. The day you stop learning is the day you stop growing. It's so true.
It really is. And I think it speaks to this idea that education isn't just something that happens within the four walls of a classroom.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong journey.
Yes. And it's a journey we're all on together, right? As parents, educators, mentors, and simply as fellow humans, I think we have a responsibility to create a culture that values and supports lifelong learning.
Absolutely. We need to encourage each other to be curious, to take risks, to never stop exploring.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from understanding what it means to be a global problem solver to embracing lifelong learning. But it all comes back to that central question. How do we prepare for a future that's constantly evolving?
And what does that even look like in practice?
Right. How do we take all of this amazing information and actually apply it to our lives? It's funny, we started this deep dive talking about this report from Google for education, but honestly, this feels so much bigger than that now.
It is bigger. It's about the future.
Uh-huh.
The future that we want for everyone, our kids, their kids.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at this turning point, you know what I mean? Like, the old ways just aren't going to cut it anymore. But that's kind of exciting too, right? We can rethink everything.
Exactly. It's all up for grabs. And it's not even just about technology, although, yeah, that's a big part of it. But it's about creativity, critical thinking, even just working together, empathy. It's like we're trying to raise a generation of lifelong learners that aren't afraid of anything, who can roll with the punches and solve any problem that comes their way.
And that's what I love about this whole conversation. It's not just theoretical. So for everyone listening, what's your biggest takeaway? What really hit home for you? What are you going to do differently tomorrow?
Maybe you're finally going to learn that new thing you've been putting off, or tackle that problem from a new angle. Or, hey, maybe you're even thinking differently about how your kids are learning. Whatever it is, I hope this got you thinking.
Me too. This is a conversation we need to keep having because the future of, well, everything, education, work, even the world, it doesn't just happen to us, We make it happen.
So keep asking questions.